Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the updated tier list for the September patch. There's been quite a lot of hero changes and meta changes, and there's also been a tournament. So it is time to once again decide the power level of each hero in the current meta. Not very surprisingly, Abrams is still S tier. He received a tiny nerf to his heal. Other than that, he also received a tiny nerf because they nerfed some of the melee items. But in practicality, he plays exactly the same. He's very oppressive. If he gets ahead, he's pretty much unkillable. And it's also not that hard to play him that way. There is some skill cap stuff to how to fake melees and try to bait out the parries and stuff, but Abrams is still one of the best heroes in the game. He still has an ult that stuns, he still has a shoulder charge that stuns, he's extremely tanky and annoying to deal with, and you need to buy 2 to 3 items just to counter him. You need to get Decay, you need to get Heal Bane, Toxic Bullets, and also maybe Improved Burst because he has a high health pool, and since that's health-based damage, that's good. Next up we have Bebop. I previously put Bebop in B tier, but a lot have changed since then. First of all, they buffed his ult to do AoE damage, and then nerfed his ult after because they realized that the AoE damage is kind of broken. I've also been playing a shit ton of Bebop since the last time I made the power rankings, and I think I'm moving him from B to A. He wasn't picked in the tournaments, but this isn't necessarily a esports tier list because there are very specific team thing that teams focus on when they play in tournaments, but it's more so how oppressive he is in general. His hook is still very annoying to deal with in the laning stage, and in the late game, one hook can win you the game because you can try to play for picks instead of just going in. Ult Bebop is definitely one of the most oppressive builds now. Even after they nerfed his ult, it still does AoE damage and it still scales really well with Spirit. And because of the incredible range you have with improved reach, you can also deal damage from outside the maximum range of counter items like knockdown and so on. And even then you can still buy Unstoppable if you really are struggling with that. Bebop is also my favorite hero to play right now, by the way. I play Double Bomb Bebop every day and it's a lot of fun. Dynamo, still S tier at the very, very top. He has the best ultimate in the game. It's an ultimate that can straight up win you a game alone. They nerfed his gun slightly because some people were playing extremely gun-heavy Dynamo builds because both his 1 and his 2 scales his fire rate and his damage towards the targets that he stuns. But even after the gun nerf, Dynamo is still extremely strong. He has a heal, he has a stun. His 2 can make his entire team dodge a specific ability, like for instance, if a gray Talon owl comes in, you can stand next to Dynamo and he can teleport everybody out and nobody's gonna take damage from it. So yeah, Dynamo is probably the best hero in the game overall. The higher up you get and the more coordinated teams get, the harder he becomes to deal with. Then we have Grey Talon. Grey Talon is still in that same weird spot. He is pretty easy to run over. Most Grey Talon builds are focused on playing extremely far back and using the early game to farm spirit stacks with your ult. He gets 5 spirit permanently every time gets a killing blow with the bird, which means that he can technically infinitely scale, and there are games where Grey Talons can completely pop off, but I think there are also infinitely more games where Grey Talon doesn't have the impact that he requires, and I think he is definitely on the weaker side of things. I previously put him above Vindicta in the previous meta update, and I do not think that's no longer the case. And I think he's B tier, to be honest. He still has some of the highest burst damage in the game when you focus on spirit builds, but overall, I think in a lot of cases, Grey Talon doesn't get to do all this cool stuff that his hero is capable of. Most of the times, he does get shut down, and there are a lot of counter abilities, and also with a tank-heavy meta, it's just hard to get the value out of him. All right, next up we have Haze. Haze has always been one of the most popular heroes, but Haze wasn't necessarily the best hero. And then Haze got a lot of buffs, and now Haze is very strong. Another thing about this hero is that with Silencer plus Unstoppable plus Ricochet, it's like a trifecta of items that makes your ultimate uncounterable, meaning that whenever someone tries to take mid-boss or whenever someone's pushing your patron or something, Haze has one of the scariest ults in the game. In a lot of games, you don't even need to get unstoppable because there's not that many things that counters the ultimate, but nonetheless, this hero has gotten a lot better. And if you let a Haze farm, you're gonna run into issues later. The best way to shut down a Haze is to do it early game. It's a very squishy hero. Late game, Haze is very strong and very hard to deal with, and also gets bonus point for having stealth ability. Can set up, and even the sleep. So even though you're a hyper carry, you do have a lot of crowd control, a lot of stuff to do, as long as you get through the early game safely. I will say that I'm gonna put Haze in the top of A tier, simply because you do require to farm a lot. It's not the strongest hero early to mid game, and you are fairly squishy, and you do require tons of souls to do what you wanna do. All right, next up we have Infernus. Infernus has had some changes back and forth to the Flame Dash. Other than that, he hasn't had that big of changes. It's a hero that can be extremely oppressive in the late game. Honestly, I think Infernus is decent all the way through, but it's also a hero that is very hard to play from behind because most of his abilities require you to apply your afterburn, your dot, onto heroes, and you lifesteal off of that. So there's a lot of builds, like there's a tank Infernus build that is pretty popular now, where you get leech, and some build ricochet. You have toxic bullets, it's very mandatory on him, and you can be very annoying to deal with. He gets very shut down by anti-heal items, and that's why I'm putting him in A instead of S, slightly behind Haze right now. If you get decay, toxic bullets, and healbane, that does nerf Infernus a lot, much more than how as much as you deal with Haze. Then next up we have Ivy. Ivy's had a lot of changes since we last did a power ranking. Most importantly, the ultimate. The ultimate of Ivy is still too strong in my opinion. I think that it's the one hero that can just almost guarantee urn control in every game. And that is something that over the course of like an entire game, if you have like good strategy and good communication, that can do so much. And now that the cast time of the ult is 1.3 seconds, it means that Ivy can actually solo fly the urn if you press the timing correctly. Previously, it only worked if a teammate picked up the urn and Ivy picked up the friendly hero. But now because they nerfed the cast time on the ult, it also means that Ivy stays on the ground long enough to be able to also pick up the urn while casting the ult, meaning you can fly straight across and deliver the urn, which is insane. Ivy also still has one of the best guns in the game, and her stone statue thing makes you immune, you stun the enemy, and it heals you and your teammates. Yeah, Ivy is just very, very strong, and I'm putting her right up here next to Dynamo and Abrams. And then we have Kelvin. Kelvin is a hero that is really hard to balance. Every time there's been a big patch, Kelvin's gotten nerfed. The first nerf a while ago removed disarm from his beam and just made it into a fire rate and attack speed slow. And then the recent nerfs reduced the amount of fire rates and attack speed that the beam does. It used to be 80%, I believe, and now it's 40% fire rate and 70% movement speed instead of 80. That also made a lot of Kelvin builds change a bit, where they still get a lot of the spirit items like cooldown, duration extender, surge of power and stuff. But he's also very popular to play as a pseudo support. You have the heal beam, you have the healing nova. It's very popular to rush vitality items that heal on Kelvin, making him really strong in the laning stage, and his ult is also incredibly strong. They did, however, change his ult recently because you used to be able to just pop Kelvin ult and you kind of just win any objective that is inside. This worked on the urn, this worked on the mid boss, and it even worked on the patron. They did change that very cleverly, where the objective now freezes inside the Kelvin bubble. And I think this is a very important change for the future of esports of this game too, because I think that the old Kelvin ult would make a lot of esports matches really boring to watch, because there could be a match that is like 40 minutes long and it all breaks down to one super important team fight, and then everybody just jumps inside the bubble. He casts his bubble and they just like one-shot the objective and there's no counterplay. So I'm really glad that they came with that clever change, and that also makes Kelvin slightly worse. But because we are in a tank meta and because he is this kind of like pseudo tank support and he still is very oppressive, I still am putting him right up here because I feel like every single time I play against a Kelvin, it just becomes so much harder to win in general. Okay, next up we have Lady Geist. Lady Geist is one of the most annoying ults to deal with. She hasn't really been changed much. She's kind of been the same. She's kind of been like right bang in the middle most of the time. I don't think she would be picked in those tournaments much because her ult is very situated around solo play and 1v1 duels. She doesn't need too much to come online. She needs like maybe Berserker and a Warp Stone and a few other items and some Spirit Lifesteal and stuff. I feel like Lady Geist can definitely be like a pub stomper, but I also feel like the more difficult the games get, the less impact you'll have on Lady Geist. She is, however, very strong in the laning stage. She pokes a lot with the grenade. But overall, I think there are stronger heroes out there. And I think that her ult gets like slightly gimmicky in team fights. You're forced to be in a very deep position to get your ult off because of the short range, which is why you need Warp Stone too. But the problem with this is it's kind of like a full commit unless you get like Ethereal Shift or maybe like a Magic Carpet or something to get out. So I'm going to put Lady Geist in B tier. Then we have Lash. Since the last time we made this tier list, they nerfed Lash quite a bit. He basically gets one less charge from his grapple when you buy Rapid Recharge, which is a core item on any Lash build. And they also removed the extra stamina point you get from grappling. This makes it much harder to play sustained team fights with Lash. I still think he's very strong and I still think he has a lot of potential just because of like how oppressive the displacement ult is. And good players can really dominate lobbies with this hero even after the nerfs because his ult is pretty much still the same. So I believe that Lash is still right up here. Maybe like there. One of the downsides with Lash is also it's one of the worst heroes to play from behind because you're forced to get in there. It's kind of similar to Infernus. You're kind of forced to get in there and get in deep and try to like displace your enemies. And it feels like your abilities do no damage when you're playing from behind. But nonetheless, it is a really good hero. Then we have McGinnis. Last time I made this tier list, McGinnis was the only hero I put in C tier. Right now, they did a few changes. They tried to make Spirit McGinnis more viable by giving the AoE heal a Spirit scaling. So the more Spirit you have, the bigger the AoE is as well. I don't think that changes too much on how you play McGinnis. I still feel like this is Hub Stomper hero. I think the reason why it like some stat sites in the past have shown that McGinnis has a decent win rate is because you're kind of just like, you're pushing down lanes, you're destroying walkers, and then you die, and then you repeat, and you push, and you die, and you repeat. And when you play against good players, that will get punished very easily. There is a lot of cool stuff you can do with her wall, and she is fun to play, but to me, she still belongs in C tier. I do not think you will ever see a McGinnis in a tournament. And I don't think you'll see a lot of McGinnis in high tier lobbies. I do think it's the type of hero that some people will one trick and still make her look good. But for the general player base, I think this is a noob stomper hero. I think that, and that's still the case. Next up, we have Krill. Krill is the only hero in the game that can permanently lock down a target for a very long time. And the reason why this is really good is because some games, there is like one super high priority target, but it might be really hard to deal with this super high priority target. Let's say it's a Haze, or it's a Dynamo with his ult, or it's a Lash, or whatever it is. Some like, and Krill is like the best hero in the game to deal with this one target that is like getting out of hand. You can buy a Phantom Strike, you can buy a Duration Extender, you have full lifesteal on your ult, you get very tanky. He's good in the laning stage. He's almost unkillable in the laning stage because of how much he lifesteals with his 2 ability. And he's just really oppressive all the way through. When you get Torment Pulse, you farm jungles really fast as well. I actually think I'm putting him right up here. I think that the biggest downside with Krill is that he's very chunky, has a big hitbox that makes him easy to hook. He also has 2 headshot hitboxes. You can headshot both Mo and Krill. So that makes him a little bit more susceptible to taking a lot of damage, but nonetheless, an extremely oppressive hero. And I've seen a lot of games where he will just absolutely destroy. If he gets ahead in farm, he can just like basically lock anyone down and kill them. It's really good against slippery heroes like Pocket as well and Viscous. These are heroes that have a lot of ways of getting out of trouble, and Yamato as well. So yeah, Krill is that like kind of like anti-carry hero. Yeah, people are sleeping on the Krill's weapon in the laning stage. It's an automatic shotgun. I know people are saying his gun is bad. I disagree. I think it's so easy to last hit with. And also when you're pushing towers, you're doing a lot of damage once you're close enough for all the like spread pellets to hit. I actually think he's really good. Next up we have Paradox. Paradox is kind of notorious for having more impact the higher level of play there is. There are some really good players who will just swear to always play a Paradox, but she has a low win rate the last time I checked. Those stat sites don't work anymore because Valve disabled the ability to stat check because there was no real API for it. It was kind of just like if you play a lot of matches with a hero, you're going to get a high MMR, and it just became a little bit silly. I think for a lot of people, when they, including myself, and I said the same thing in the previous time we made this tier list, was that when I saw Paradox, I was like, I don't understand this hero. Like, this just seems like a really weak toolkit. But the fact that like her ult is essentially the same as the Bebop hook, except because you have the kinetic carbine, you can guarantee an ult hit. So what you do is you charge up your kinetic carbine, it makes you run really fast, and then either you have like a double jump or like a veil walker, or you use the zipline for momentum. You shoot someone and you hit them with the carbine and you instantly ult and you swap places with them, and you put down a wall between them as well, and then when they go through the wall they get silenced and they take 10% of their health and damage, and they're basically just screwed. And then you use a warp stone to kind of get back out of there. So yeah, Paradox like has kind of the same pick potential as Bebop where you play for the hooks, except I feel like the ult has a 30-second cooldown and is much easier to hit than a Bebop hook. And I think in a lot of games, Paradox, the higher level of play there is, I think you're much more likely to get value out of Paradox than Bebop. That's what I think. So I'm gonna put Paradox right up here. I'm not gonna put Paradox in S tier just because like this isn't necessarily just for like tournaments and the highest level of play. She is hard to play and she doesn't get that much value, and she isn't like a straightforward just damage dealer like Haze, who just like you hold M1 and stuff dies. So yeah. Next up we have Pocket. I actually think that Pocket is S tier. I didn't put them in S tier previously, but the more I play this game and the more I face good pockets, the more I realize that this hero's toolkit is just so crazy. Especially with all the active items and soul rebirth and stuff, it's so hard to deal with Pocket, and sometimes it feels like the only way you can actually kill Pocket is either with a Krill ult or like Glyph of Silence, Curse, and all that stuff. But I think that the skill ceiling and skill representation is crazy on this hero, so I'm putting him up in S tier. I think that this is another one of those heroes where one tricks will just like have so much impact with Pocket. I will also say my personal opinion is that this is the best balance of the game has had so far, which is also why these tier lists are hard to make, because there's not necessarily that big of a gap between each one. The other thing is also that Pocket's ult is a permanent 60% anti-heal for like 20 seconds. So if there is that one Infernus on the enemy team, or the Abrams or a Shiv, and you Pocket ult him and someone uses decay, or even you can even buy a heal bane because his ult deals spirit damage. If you just buy a heal bane, you're doing like 80-ish% healing debuff for like 20 seconds to anyone who's hit by the ult. So yeah, really strong. And then we have Seven. Seven has also gotten a lot of buffs and nerfs. Seven previously had like an insanely high win rate and pick rate across all skill tiers. They gave him a headshot resistance because his head is gigantic. Plus also the fact that when you're ulting, you're just like standing still. So it becomes really easy to shoot. Recently, there's been a new build on 7 that a lot of people have been trying out, which is the Echo Shard stun build with improved reach. Essentially, the idea is that you put down the stun and then you wait a few seconds and you Echo Shard and you put down a stun again. And if he accidentally runs into a teammate, you're perma-stunning a big group of people for like 6 seconds. And with reach, this can stun like the entire mid-boss pit or most of the base, like patron pit. So that's very strong. But I feel like Seven and Haze are kind of similar now in the sense that they both need to disappear into the jungle and then come out with like a 10-20k souls lead, and then they will just like shred everything. But it's also another hero that is completely useless if played from behind. So I think I'm gonna put him in the same spot as Haze, where he just needs to farm a lot. He does have move speed that scales off of Spirit, meaning that once he gets Boundless Spirit, he has a huge power spike, especially because they also buffed Boundless Spirit to also give 25% attack damage. So that also changes thing a bit. Another thing, which I think is a bait, is that, and I've said this before too, I think the 7 ult build is an absolute bait. I know that a lot of like, especially when this game just came out in the sense of like becoming public knowledge. A lot of people bought the Majestic Leap and they maxed ult and blah, blah, blah. It lowers his farm speed and he has like so much carry potential with like hybrid damage with Tesla bullets and Soul Shredder and the fact that he moves fast with spirits. He can like really shred, and it's kind of hard to counter because it's both bullet and spirit damage. So he pops his 3 and he has like Surge of Power and like zooms around and does a lot of damage, and it also damages nearby targets. So in my opinion, the ult is supposed to be like a last resort. You don't really skill it up before much later into the game because the ult is best for the mid-boss pit or attacking or defending a base. Then we have Shiv. I put Shiv at the very top of my S tier, the S tier last time. He's received a lot of nerfs. They just keep nerfing him. He's probably nerfed like 4 times by now. But the thing is that because he has a passive ability that reduces the amount of burst damage you take, it just like he just feels so tanky. And like he has an ult that is an execute and it can like reset cooldowns. It resets the cooldown of it if you get a killing blow. There are a lot of like cool builds that are starting to come. You have the Colossus Phantom Strike melee build. You have the whatever spirit item that makes your dagger do a lot of damage. Basically what you do, you throw your dagger on someone and it starts lowering their spirit resistance, and then when it gets low enough, you just dash through them and they take like 700 damage. I don't think he is S tier anymore because now it's kind of the case where the only times where Shivs get really dominant is when they get far ahead in souls. So I do think that Shiv is starting to become in a good spot, but I will say it took like 4 or 5 nerfs to get him there. I still think he's one of the strongest heroes in the game, but I still think that I'll put him here. I still think that Abrams is more oppressive as of right now, especially because he has 2 different stuns as well. And these stuns also, especially now that, for instance, heroes like Haze and Mo and Krill are really strong, Abrams also instantly counters both their ults. So that is also something to have in mind, is that like your hero is only as strong as the heroes that he's currently strong against. So for instance, if Haze is strong, then Abrams becomes a better pick because you need Abrams to counter Haze, and Haze just gets owned by Abrams in a lot of cases. Okay, it's getting a little bit silly that I'm almost not putting anything in B and C, but it's so hard to like determine the actual difference between these ones. Like you could always like shift it down a little bit, but I feel like these heroes all deliver such similar power levels that it's really hard. Okay, next up is Vindicta. Vindicta has recently got some buffs. Now headshots on her ult deals 20% bonus damage, and she can also use her movement abilities while flying, just like Grey Talon can do. There's also movement speed builds that have started to show up that makes her really scary, because one of the issues with the like most popular Vindicta builds before was that she was like just floating in the air and like easy to pick out of there. But because now people have like figured out that movement speed works on her flying ability, these like crazy movement speed builds makes her really scary to play against, and she does a lot of damage. And they also changed how the soul gain works. So for those of you who don't know, she gets 600 bonus souls if she gets a killing blow with her ult. It's actually the only ability in the game that affects how many souls you get. But what they changed was that if you get an assist when Vindicta gets the killing blow, you get a share of those souls. Now, this is a pretty important change because that means that if you're in a team fight and Vindicta gets the last hits, on these heroes in a team fight. It means that your entire team will now be getting more souls every time you're doing a team fight because Vindicta gets the last hit. That makes her very strong because that is something that no other hero can do. So with that in mind, I think I'm putting her right here in the middle of A tier. I still think it's easier to carry with Haze or 7. I still think that Vindicta is more comp dependent. There are some games where you just feel like you can't win because the Vindicta has gotten ahead, to be honest. You know what, guys? Let's be controversial. Let's be controversial. McGinnis, you get the D. Lady Geist and Great Talon, you're going down in C. And then what we do is we put Infernus here, Lash, and Bebop like this. There we go. Because it's all relative anyway, so it's about the order they're in. And it's just easier this way. You guys can say what you want, but you have to understand that this is like the same as with Dota balance. And the fact is that every hero is busted. Every hero is busted, guys. There's one game, then suddenly Bebop like kills 6 people out of the sky with his Majestic Leap ult. The next game, Dynamo ults everybody. Then Kelvin freezing domes you, and then Haze like makes you silenced, and everybody just dies from the Haze ult. Like every hero is OP in this game, and that's what makes it balanced. Infernus burn is insane. I agree, but guess what? Haze can just press a button, and then everybody dies. Infernus is great in 1v1s, but he gets extremely countered by items. Infernus gets extremely countered by healing reduction, or even spirit armor, or debuff remover. Okay, next up we have Viscous. Viscous has a very high skill ceiling. In like low tier games, he's gonna have very little impact. They did change him a while ago where the puddle punch now is considered a light melee. Kind of ironic really that it's a light melee because it's a giant fist like punching you halfway through the map. But nonetheless, that's for balancing reasons, obviously. But when you play against a good Viscous, you'll realize that it's also an extremely oppressive hero, especially when you can use your items while ulting. He's really hard to kill. It's another one of those heroes that you kind of need to buy Silencing Glyph, Curse, or have a Mo and Krill to deal with. But he is hard to play. And in a lot of games, Viscous won't have the impact that you think he's gonna have because it requires a lot of skill to do it. But nonetheless, it's definitely a A-tier hero. All right, next up we have Warden. Warden is very interesting. He has always had a pretty high win rate. He has his fire rate scales with spirit. His ult does a ton of lifesteal and AoE damage, but still has like a 2.2 second casting time before it gets activated. And it plays a voice line, meaning that everybody can hear it. Another thing is that usually you have to buy slowing hex to combo it with your cage, because if they run outside the max distance of your cage, it doesn't do anything. I feel like in a lot of cases, Warden doesn't get to do what he wants to do, which is run people down and put them in cages. The movement speed build definitely helped because like once he gets his ult up, he wants to run people down really quickly. But I feel like Warden only does well if he's really far ahead in souls. His gun animation isn't that great for last hits. His projectile is pretty slow. In a lot of cases, he becomes a sitting duck because of how slow the cast time is on his ult. And I just think that this is another pub stomper hero where you can run really fast and you can blast people, but in a lot of cases, he gets shut down before he gets to do what he wants to do. So I'm putting him here right behind Infernus. Actually, I think I'm putting him behind Lash. I still think that Lash is better. All right, next up we have Wraith. Wraith is still one of those really strong 1v1 heroes. You almost have to buy reactive barrier when you play against Wraith. She has a good gun animation. She can push towers really well. She also has a great escape tool. I think that like also when she has her ult maxed out, it hits multiple targets and stuff. But I still do think that Wraith is better early to mid, whereas like Haze and 7 becomes better late. I don't feel like you get the same value out of Wraith's ult super late because there are so many ways of countering it. You can buy Ethereal Shift. It's a very slow projectile that follows you, so once heroes get a lot of movement speed, they can also just run away and hide somewhere while they get stunned by the ult. It's kind of one of those things that makes her really strong early to mid game for ganking, but I don't see her as strong as Haze, 7, or Vindicta as of right now. I feel I cannot remember a single game, I think, where we lost because of a Wraith just like destroying us. It doesn't feel like she has that kind of impact. I'm putting her here. And then finally we have Yamato. When I made the previous tier lists, I didn't put Yamato that high because I felt like in a lot of games, Yamato just like pops ult to not die, and then she will just die 6 seconds after instead. And then the more I played in like high MMR lobbies, and the more I saw people kind of one-tricking Yamato, like Necros and Ziptai and stuff, the more I realized like how good this hero actually is once you play her a lot. There's a lot of finicky things with the ult because it's the only ability that like you can be completely immune to damage and crowd control effects for 6 seconds, and you buy a refresher, you can do that twice. Meaning that she's one of the best heroes for mid-boss deal. You run in with your ult and you can parry everybody and you don't get crowd control, so the parry will go through. And you can also punch the crystal without anyone parrying you because you're immune to crowd control. She also can just stall fights extremely well, and you're almost required to buy Curse or Silence Glyph to kill her. And that's where my biggest criticism goes to Yamato, and I think that's the same with Viscous as well, that once people buy active items like Curse and Silence Glyph, it becomes a lot harder to play Yamato. She's also very countered by Mo and Krill, just like Viscous is. And that's also why I'm gonna put her in the same category up here. I'm putting her above Viscous just because I think that she's still easier to play than what Viscous is. But nonetheless, I had so many games where like a Yamato gets out of hand and it feels like you can't do anything to prevent, like you just can't shut her down. That's how it feels in a lot of cases. So yeah, that was my updated tier list for the September patch. Quite a lot of changes from last time. I will say it is really hard to like make these tiers, and I was trying to spread it out a little bit more than before. I know I moved a lot more down, but I also didn't just want to have like 12 heroes in the A tier list. I hope this helped in like giving you guys an idea of where I feel the current power rankings are, and feel free to let me know what you agree on and disagree on. It is important to remember that these lists are subjective, so obviously you can feel free to agree and disagree as much as you want, but this is the way I feel about the current meta as of right now. And yeah, drop a subscription if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.